Haven't you ever thought, and Barbara said, hey, Don, you've worked all your life. Why don't you just stay home now and,
No, I'm going great. You're the one that's finished.
No, I'm not.
No. Hey, don't sell me down the river. I'm hot. I'm going with Ed. We're having our own Tonight Show. And then I'm going to get my kid on Star Search and skyrocket. I don't think about retirement. When the audience doesn't show up, like tonight. But I want to say...
Let me do this, and then we'll come back.
Don't beg. It's your show for another year.
That's right.
And then that other kid comes in with the funny jaw.
Yeah, then you're... We'll be right back.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey, what's it like to be insulted by one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet? Just ask any of the countless victims of Mr. Warmth, Don Rickles.
We're excited to talk with Michael Seth Starr, a prolific biographer whose books include Don Rickles, The Merchant of Venom. Michael, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. You know, Jonathan, I can tell you what it's like to be insulted by Don Rickles because I was, in a fun way when I was working at the New York Post for covering television for almost 30 years. And I had the chance to interview Don several times. And it was a thing with him when he was doing interviews to insult the reporter, but as Don Rickles insulting somebody. And I actually looked forward to it. And it was sort of like a mark of a badge of honor to have, Don sort of yelling at me on the other end of the phone, like, "Today our Post, I lined my birdcage with that garbage," like that kind of thing. So it was fun.
Yeah, I've heard that people used to line up to be insulted by him.
What they would do was especially when he was doing a stage show, whether in Las Vegas or anywhere else, the person who was sort of running the affair would pick out people who he just knew was like low-hanging fruit for Don. Somebody who might be overweight or dressed strangely or, maybe not a looker, and they would put them in the front row so Don could sort of pick them out and pick them off one by one.
Yeah, and anybody who happened to be ethnic in any way.
Oh, yes. That was even better. Even better.
Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, my ass, you're a Jap. I'll tell you this. 3 years in the jungle looking for your uncle. I'll tell you this. Walking around going, oh. No, I kid you, we're all brothers.
Well, it sounds like you had early exposure to him, but do you remember the first time you became aware of Don Rickles?
The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and sort of at the same consecutively the Dean Martin roasts, which were big on TV in the early to mid 70s, and they always had Don on. He did a lot of them. And that was probably the first time that I was aware. It was sort of a combination of the Dean Martin roasts and then watching him on the Tonight Show, which was a treat. It was like, appointment viewing when you knew Don was going to be on. And he was one of Carson's favorite guests, along with Rodney Dangerfield, too. They would just crack Carson up. And he had Don. Don had basically an open invitation just to walk on whenever he wanted to. And actually, one of his funniest appearances on the Tonight Show when he walked on when in the middle of Johnny was interviewing Frank Sinatra, and Don walked on. He and Frank went back years. Don was an honorary member of the Rat Pack, and he just ripped into Sinatra like you wouldn't believe.
Guido says hi. He hasn't had a chance to talk to you. And from Jersey City, your good friend Bubani Umbatsa.
What's his name?
He started his car with your album on, and now he's a highway.
He never missed. I mean, it was just automatic with Don, with just one after another, kind of like Dangerfield, just one joke after another. I take that back. Rodney was more of a joke teller. Don was just observational, ripping somebody another one kind of humor. As you know, as people who are familiar with Don's work know, that was his specialty.
As you mentioned in the book, too, a lot of the things that he said were nonsensical. It was just that he was firing things off so quickly that it was funny, even if he called someone a hockey puck, which is not intrinsically a funny thing to do. The fact that he did it in the way that he did it made it feel like the best insult in the world.
Yeah, it was, go sit on a rubber duck, give him a cookie, he'll go away, like that sort of thing.
You get a horse and live in the mountains someplace and don't bother anybody. Got a personality like a dead moth.
It was just such a rapid fire string of insults that, yes, you're right. Some of them didn't. If you stop to think about it, they didn't make sense. But you had one coming up in 3 seconds that hit, and it was just his whole delivery, and the fact that people knew he was going to insult people. They would just laugh anyway because it was his tone of voice and his quick observations about people, whether it be their nationality or their height, color of their skin, their ethnicity, their religion. He would just hone in and boom, that was it.
I was surprised to read that Rickles was a shy and self-conscious kid growing up. How did he discover his comedic knack?
Yeah, it was almost by accident. Don wanted to be a dramatic actor, believe it or not, growing up. He ended up going to the Academy of Dramatic Arts here in New York City for 2 years, and he graduated. But when he got out of drama school, he auditioned for a couple roles on Broadway, and nothing was panning out. So he started doing MC work here in New York and sort of on the up and down the East Coast. And he was in a club in Washington, D.C., which was down by the Navy Yard. So there were a lot of sailors in the audience, and Don was, emceeing, introducing acts, and doing some celebrity impersonations. It wasn't going well, so he just started making fun of some of the sailors out of sheer. He didn't know what else to do. I mean, just to save his own hide, and he got a lot of laughs. And he just discovered he had this knack of insulting people. Which is a little unusual because he grew up in a very secure household. He loved his mother and his father. He was an only child. He had a nice childhood. Wasn't like he was being locked in a closet somewhere and being yelled at all the time. So it was a little surprising that was part of his personality, this aggressive side, because it really wasn't who he was off stage. He was a very nice man. I mean, everybody loved him in show business, and I think that's what made being insulted by Don Rickles more of a badge of honor than a tried and true insult, because you knew he was a nice guy, and it was just an act. So that made it more palatable for people to be belittled, so to speak, by Mr. Warmth, Don Rickles, the Merchant of Venom.
Jimmy Walker's here. Dynamite! He's a fantastic guy. He's in a show called Good Times, which I never watch. I do. Once in a while, I use it for a nightlight when the wife and I want to play charades.
Yeah, it was just part of his shtick, and he was the only one. There was another comedian named Jack E. Leonard. They called him Fat Jack because he was rotund, who also told insults, but Don did it in a different way. Fat Jack was a little more, let's say, intellectual as far as picking people apart. And there was some talk early on that Don was ripping him off and all that, but that wasn't the case. There was nobody like Don Rickles. I mean, the way he attacked an audience, I use attack in quotes, and picked people out, was something that Fat Jack Leonard did not do. So it was a different method of insulting people.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. How was Don Rickles able to get away with all those insults?
It probably would not work today, Joey. I don't think that would go over well. but it was you have to take it in the context of what entertainment was like then, and um, the sorts of comedians that were out there, and people. As far as Don was concerned, this was his bread and butter. People expect, and he was extremely popular, as we know. So he was not being lambasted for making fun of people. It was just a different era. I don't want to say people were desensitized to it. I don't think that's the case. I mean, there were some people who were offended by him over the years, but for the most part, if you went to see a Don Rickles show, you knew what you were going to get, and you were there for a reason. And that was to listen to him insult people, and know that he might pick you out in the crowd and go for it. So it's just a different era. Um, we would call it, on PC nowadays, but back then it was just something that was accepted.
I make fun of the black people. Without you, we'd have no Olympics. That's right. They're great runners. You put a gun on their ass, they can beat a bullet. I'll tell you this, though. Laugh and enjoy people. That's the main thing. I swear to God. Is that your wife, sir? Jesus Christ. I'll tell you this.
He got away with it. Up until very, very late in his career, I think some people started to take a little offense to it. He told he was at I think it was an American Film Institute. The story's in the book. I think it was an American Film Institute dinner. I think it was honoring Shirley MacLaine. I don't remember. And he got up. He knew Shirley from years back. He got up, started insulting her and her movies, and then he made a joke about President Obama, who was president then. Obama didn't bring his mop or something, and there was like dead silence. So I think he overstepped that one, and but 30 seconds later he had the crowd back with him, and they cut that remark about President Obama from from the telecast of that event, so you didn't see it. But yeah, today he would be canceled, I think, within 5 minutes.
Or he would be like the right wing's favorite comedian,
Yeah, and I think it was just the fact that he made fun of everybody. He wasn't picking out one particular group. He made fun of blacks, Jews, Catholics, Italians, Greeks. I mean, whatever there was in his audience. He made fun of Johnny Carson when he was on the Carson show. He made fun of Johnny's parents. Homer Carson, I forget his name, Ruth, I think her name was, and sitting back on Nebraska counting the corn husks, like that sort of thing.
Don had an incredibly close relationship with his mother, Adat. Could you describe that for us?
Yeah, Don was an only child, and he was Edda's pride and joy, from the very beginning, and his father too. Don's father passed away. I think it was in the early 50s when Don was about 30 or thereabouts, and he had a good relationship with his father too. But his father was a very quiet, retiring sort. Don's mother, Etta, was very brash and sort of in your face, and sort of like, stereotypical kind of Jewish mother type with, pushing her son, who was a little reticent, but she would push him to, speak up and speak your mind and introduce yourself. There's a story in the book where they were taking I think a bus to Radio City to see a show, and she got up and said, "This is my son, Don Rickles. He's going to be famous one day," and she always supported him in whatever he did. When he announced that he wanted to go to drama school, no problem. It wasn't like, what are you going to do being an actor? It's such a, nobody who wants to be an actor. No, it was, whatever you want to do, you'll be good at it. And I think Don's the dramatic chops were never really tested. I mean, yes, he was in the movie Casino with Robert De Niro, and people always mention that. Yeah, it was a smaller kind of role. But he went, and he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and he finished, and he tried to be a successful dramatic actor, and his mother always supported him. And then once he made it as a comedian, Etta was very supportive, and she would come backstage and bring, Don, matzo ball soup, and whoever happened to be in the club, she'd bring matzo ball soup to them, and she was very friendly. All the comedians loved her. They all knew who she was. And she was a force, kind of like Don in a way, like sort of like a force of nature. And they were very close up until the day she died. He would, as a matter of fact, in his act, when he closed out his act after she passed away, he would always mention her and sort of say a little prayer to her, and it was very nice, very touching. And I think Don's father also, had he lived long enough to see Don reach the pinnacle of success, would have been the same way. He was by all accounts was a nice man, just not as vocal as Etta Rickles was.
Which explains how they could be married. I think if you had two Eddas, it would have been difficult.
Two Ettas, yeah, they would cancel each other out, probably, yes. So yeah, and people are always surprised. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Don's work in the '60s on all these TV shows. I was surprised when I found, I made some notes about all that. I mean, most of them are in the book, but I mean, he was on just about every single sitcom you could think of. I mean, The Munsters, Get Smart, I Dream of Jeannie, Gilligan's Island. He was on The Twilight Zone, Beverly Hillbillies, The Addams Family, Munsters. I mean, it was just like the list goes on.
Every day I remember. Eat your cottage cheese, Francis. Drink your milky, Francis. Don't forget to wear your rubber hat, Francis.
Your Aunt Effie sounds very sweet.
Sweet? If I didn't get away from her, she would have made a sissy out of me.
This is while he was in the clubs. So he would, he could go in, do a few days of work, make some money. He was always welcome for these short appearances, but he could never sort of find the right vehicle for himself. I mean, I think when you come in as a guest star, especially with somebody with Don's act, you can't write that act. So it was very hard to write a character for him in a 30-minute or 22-minute sitcom. He had to sort of play a role, and he was fine, but it wasn't the Don Rickles that people loved and expected. But he did make a lot of these appearances through the '60s, and before he finally got his own show.
CPO Sharkey seemed like a good idea, where they kind of took the audience from the nightclub act that he would pick on and put them under his charge as sailors. But it's not that funny, actually. I went back and watched some episodes. It doesn't hit the same way because he's really not that great when he's on script.
Yeah, he did add them a little bit in that show, but I would agree with you. And I think you described it perfectly, that they knew by now that he needed to sort of be comfortable with the environment. So they did pick, the black guy, the Puerto Rican guy, the Jewish guy, the sidekick, who was this big looming, big dorky guy. So Don could, pick on each of them individually. And also Don had been in the Navy. So here he was playing a naval officer, which he knew a little bit about. So yeah, it was a big enough success that it was renewed for a second season, but it was 2 seasons and it was done. But when people think of Don Rickles in TV shows, they generally think of CPO Sharkey, and not the Beverly Hillbillies or the Munsters or I Dream of Jeannie. So yeah, but I think after that he realized, well, he had this sitcom with Richard Lewis on Fox in the early '90s, and that didn't work because, as you mentioned before, we were talking about Don's parents. Two people of the same. Don, even though Don's style was a little different, but he and Richard Lewis just never. Richard Lewis talks about this in the book. The late Richard Lewis, unfortunately, that their styles just didn't mesh properly. It was called Daddy Dearest, if memory serves. And that only lasted, I don't know, a little half a season or more than half a season. So yeah, it was tough to put him in a series role, even though he always wanted that. But I think he realized after a while, after all these hits and misses, that it wasn't his forte.
So, Michael, what can you tell us about Rickles' bizarre run as a DC Comics character?
He was featured in 2 DC comics called Superman's Pal, the new Jimmy Olsen, and he was a character named Goody Rickles. They spelled Rickles Rickels, not Les, just a different. Even it was Don. I mean, we all knew it was Don. The readers knew it was Don, and he wore horn rimmed glasses. And this was the brainchild. It was brought. Jack Kirby was a legend in the comic book community, especially at DC Comics. He was an illustrator and he wrote comic books. And 2 of his assistants, their names were Mark Evanier, who I interviewed in the book about this, and Steve Sherman. Mark Evanier had seen Don in Las Vegas and just thought it would be this weird idea to pitch him as a character. And to his amazement, Jack Kirby went for it because he was a big Don Rickles fan. And they put this character in. It really made no sense in the context of whatever storyline that particular comic that week was talking about. This was in 1971. I think it was May and July or May and June. So you had Goody Rickles it was Don just making fun of people. The original intent it was to have him insult Superman. That was going to be the creme de la creme of the storyline, but it didn't turn out that way. The way that it was written, it's funny to say it didn't fit. I mean, we're talking about Don Rickles in a comic book, so if that doesn't fit, I don't know what does. But it didn't fit in the context of the story, and I've forgotten about this. Also, he wasn't the first celebrity to be featured in this DC Comics universe. So there was Jackie Gleason with the Honeymooners in the mid '50s, and Bob Hope in the early '50s. Both had DC Comics characters, so it was rare. It was highly unusual and rare, but it had been done before. But I don't think it had been done in a while. So, yeah, if people are really big fans of DC Comics, they should check that out because it's bizarre.
It's very wacky. I know that title, Jimmy Olsen, was selling very poorly. I think it was the worst selling of the DC Comics. And that's why they brought Jack Kirby in to resuscitate it to the extent that he could. And I think it speaks volumes to Rickles' popularity, too, that they made him a character in that as a way to potentially boost the sales. I don't know how well those comics did, but it just speaks to his celebrity at that time.
Yeah, and they were under the impression that once they did that, Don would talk up, he would talk up the comic. He didn't do that. And as a matter of fact, years later, when he was a guest on Conan O'Brien's show, and Conan held up the thing, Don basically said, "Yeah, I never liked that. I wasn't a fan." So he didn't publicize of that like they were hoping he would. So they didn't get the bang for their buck they were hoping. And you're right, that the Jimmy Olsen line of comic books was not a big seller for them. So yeah, they were hoping that sticking a celebrity in there would juice up the sales. It never happened.
Did you learn any lessons from exploring the life and career of Don Rickles?
The stick-to-itiveness that Don had, people seem to think when they hear about these people who are or become celebrities that it happened overnight. It doesn't. It rarely does. It does happen occasionally, but it's not very often. It didn't. I would say Don was a late in life overnight sensation. When he started playing the clubs in Miami and LA in the late '50s is when he really started to gain some traction among fans and the audience. But I really admired his stick-to-itiveness through thick and thin. The fact that he really was a nice man off stage. I interviewed a lot of people, and when you do these kind of books, you'll sometimes talk to people who will say, I really don't want to comment for your book because I didn't like him, or I thought he was a jerk. I didn't get that with Don. Talking to people and having interviewed him myself a few times, knowing that it was all an act, and he might have gone a little overboard when he was, he would at the end of the act say, I love everybody, and he would sing a song about how he loved everybody. Maybe it was a little schmaltzy, but I think he meant it. And I think it stood him in good stead throughout his career and helped him have a career as long as he did with that particular brand, with this particular brand of comedy, because it doesn't always, he didn't go out of style, put it that way, until much, much, much later when the times were changing. But he was pretty much doing the same sort of act from the 50s to the early mid 2000s. And people loved it. And I just learned he was a nice man who cared about people, and where he found all that inner angst to channel to channel all the hostility towards other people in a good way, in a comedic way. I think you'd need a psychiatrist or a psychologist for that one. I can't answer that, but good guy. He was a good guy.
Yeah, and I think since he had the fortune of being immortalized as Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story also, like his legacy will continue, generations being exposed to that distinctive voice and, loving that persona.
Yeah, and even after he passed away, they cobbled together some of Don's outtakes, and they actually cobbled together a more Mr. Potato Head, even though Don was gone for Toy Story, whatever it was, 3 or 4 or something. They managed to, because that was a very popular character, and kids loved it. And it goes to show you that humor can transcend age groups. Now, Don wasn't, of course, doing the act he would have done in Las Vegas. I mean, it was maybe making a G-rated movie. I think it was G-rated, but yeah, they did take his voice after he passed away, and that Mr. Potato Head was a very popular character, and opened him up to a new generation of fans.
Yeah, I guess the real test will be if, years from now, kids are calling each other hockey pucks.
Listen, you hockey puck, I'm an entertainer. I get laughs with my insults.
Yeah, and even that's a weird story. Like, people don't really know where he got. Some people think it came from. He was giving an award to one of the Montreal Canadiens. He was John Bellevue, and he called him a hockey puck, and then it just stuck. But the Canadians loved him just for that. There's a little part in the book talks about that, how he was very popular in Canada because of that, calling everybody a hockey puck.
Thanks so much, Michael, for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan and Joey. It was great to be on. Thanks.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.